Hello, so here we are today on the 1st of October 2024, and today is the day that the sun transitions from the days of the elder tree to the days of the pine tree. So this presentation that I'm going to bring up is for the days of pine. I'll just bring up my PowerPoint. Okay, so um, the days of pine, in 2022, we did a basic video. So for basic lore about the pine tree, you can go on the Owen Grove YouTube channel and look for Pine 2022, and you'll find a video for basic lore about the pine tree. And in 2023, we spent the year looking at herbalism and the medicinal value of each tree. So if you're interested in the medicinal value of the pine tree, go on the YouTube channel and look for Pine 2023, and you'll find a video there for that. I will put them on the Facebook group tomorrow. So this year, 2024, we're looking at which gods and goddesses in the Celtic pantheons may best correspond with each tree in the Ogham. So that's what we're doing with this presentation. The days of the pine tree technically span from the 9th degree of Libra to the 27th degree of Libra. You can see that in the bottom left-hand corner here. So the days of pine are completely within the zodiac sign of Libra. The next tree is Gorse, and it's only a little bit Libra and mostly Scorpio. So the law, the star law relevant to pine is Libra law. And I'll touch on that a little bit by looking at which classical deities for the Greeks and the Romans corresponded with Libra. And it's quite interesting. It throws some insights into Celtic law, although they are, of course, different cultures. So looking at the right-hand side, each quarter of the year carries a different, what I call a mystery teaching, if you like, and it's written in the stars and carried by the law of folklore of each of the trees. And it divides the year into 4 quarters, or the Irish word is acma. So we're now entering the 4th acma, or you could just say the 4th quarter of the year. And that goes from the pine tree, roughly here at 9 o'clock, just below 9 o'clock. And then the energy descends down to gorse and then heather. And in between gorse and heather is the moment of Samhain. And then we're into the aspen trees. And then we finish this acma at the very bottom at the yew tree. So the whole essence, flavor of the 4th acma is firstly this descending downwards as the days get shorter and shorter and the nights get longer and longer, to the winter solstice. And then there's the rebirth of the sun, and then energy rises up again with a brand new cycle going through the 1st acma with the birch tree and the rowan tree to Imbolc and stuff. So right now we're descending, and the area we're descending into is the wild heath. And that's specific because in the 1st acma, just as the alder tree and willow tree are side by side, they are the trees that love living by the riverside. So with alder and willow, you've got the water's edge, the riverbank. And that same sort of geography pattern happens here in the 4th acma, that gorse and heather, which of course are not strictly speaking trees at all, they're shrubs. But what's unique about gorse and heather is that they belong to the heath, the wild heathland. And the heather gorse heathland is also where you find pine trees. Pine trees thrive very well in the wild heath, as well as hilltops and mountain tops and stuff. But, so pine, gorse, and heather, they're all kind of wild heathland. And that coincides with Samhain law about the wild hunt and stuff. And the star law of that is fascinating, which I'll come to. So right now, then, we're going into the days of pine, and we're gonna get ready for the wild hunt, which is gorse and heather. And then that would take us through to the aspen forests, which is very interesting. It's to do the realm of ancestors and the star realms, concluding with the yew tree at winter solstice. That's where we're at with this fourth Akma. That's the song or the poem of these final days of the year, if you like. So here's star law for the days that we're in then. So looking at the bottom, you can see Libra. So remember that the pine tree is completely Libra. And we're going to focus on the Libra aspects in the rest of this presentation, but I just want to draw your attention that above Libra, you can see a constellation called Serpens Caput. That means the serpent's head or the snake's head. And above that, there's a constellation called Corona Borealis, the northern crown. So the serpent's head and the northern crown are very, very important for the days of gorse and heather. So right now, we're going to focus on Libra. But when you get to the days of heather, this is the star law that corresponds with the wild heath and the wild hunt and Samhain. And you'll see that the winter hunter figure, Canunus, has in one hand a torque, a circle, and in the other hand, a serpent, and the head is by his head. So the serpent's head and the northern crown are there in the night sky corresponding with Scorpio and Samhain. So the figure of Canunus on the Gunderstrup cauldron is uniquely specific to Samhain and the stars that the sun is passing through in its year journey. But we'll deal with that more, Canunus, the serpent's head, and the torque in the days of gorse and heather. So right now, I'm going to go back to the pine tree, which is mainly Libra. So here's a design that we've been looking at all year. It's a part of a wheel of deities, how the classical world, Greek and Roman, related different gods and goddesses to the signs of the zodiac. So roughly at the midnight position, you've got pine and the symbol for Libra. And the classical deities for Libra, for the Greeks and the Romans, were the smith god, the god of the forge, Vulcan and Hephaestus. They were the blacksmith gods, the forge gods. So it's very interesting how that might relate to Celtic deities that are blacksmiths, because that would be in keeping with the classical world idea of this time of year with Libra. So in the in the Celtic world, there are blacksmith deities. The most famous one, of course, is Brigid herself, and I'll come back to her further on in the presentation. But the Celtic equivalents of Vulcan, the blacksmith, in Gaul was Gobanus as the blacksmith god, and in Wales, Gophanon. It's the same deity, really. It's just a regional dialect. And Ireland had the equivalent, and I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't want to upset any Irish people. I'm guessing the B might be silent, so it might be something like Goifni, but I don't know. I don't know how to pronounce the Gaelic word. But in Gaul, go Barnus, in Wales, go Fannon. So there are blacksmith deities in Celtic pantheons. That would be the Celtic equivalent of Vulcan and Hephaestus. So before we look at the idea of Brigid being a blacksmith as well, which is one of her three main special skills, if you like, along with poetry and healing, she was a blacksmith. But I'm going to go on a little tangent and I'll come back to it. So here's a thing then with the Ogham Grove. What to draw your attention to is two interlaced pentagrams, which we've looked at a lot in the videos. So the dark green pentagram is all of the evergreen trees. They hold the positions of a pentagram and they're anchored on the winter solstice. And interlaced with that is a golden pentagram for the rose family trees: apple, blackthorn, hawthorn, rowan, and heather. So this idea of two pentagrams interlaced, defining the circumference of a grove, a sacred circle, is what I just want to put into your mind, because the next picture came up recently on Facebook just a couple of days ago, and it blew my mind. I'll give you a moment to look at it. So this is an aerial view of Stonehenge, and I can't remember the name of the person who drew it, but it's from the 18th century. Some guy in the 1700s drew this. I'll have to find out who he is, but basically it's using two interlaced pentagrams to do two things. One, to define the circumference of the henge. The outer henge is a big circle, the main circumference, and the center point is the stone circle. So the stone circle is a small thing in the center, if you like. It's the sanctuary or the Holy of Holies, but projected off that, the pentagrams give you the radius or diameter of the circumference of the much bigger henge ramparts in the landscape around Stonehenge. But it just fascinated me that, it's a sacred circle defined by two interlaced pentagrams, just like the Ogham is. And of course, Stonehenge is Bronze Age. People chomp the dates up all the time, but it's Bronze Age. It's at least 3000 BC or thereabouts. And in the Ogham, there's not just the two pentagrams of winter solstice and summer solstice. There's four pentagrams, one anchored on the spring equinox and one anchored on the autumn equinox. So when you have all four pentagrams, you get the exact same thing as the Stonehenge thing. You get the sacred center circle in the middle, defined by the circumference. The diameter of the circumference is going to define the stone circle in the center. So when you have all four pentagrams of the Ogham Grove, you can see it clearly. What's this man in the 18th century is observing with his geometry, putting pentagrams around Stonehenge to realize the diameter of the outer henge. But that was just fascinating to me. It's this really old law, that the sacred circle or the grove, the pentagrams that are hidden within it, do they define a sanctuary in the middle, a kind of Holy of Holies in the center point? So it's an interesting idea. But going off on a tangent from that, after I was looking at the pentagrams, my mind was drawn to the circumference itself. And if you look at the very bottom at the 6 o'clock position, you'll see a kind of gateway in the henge, in the outer henge. And there's two other gateways towards the left and towards the right further up, so that the circle is precisely divided into three. That is, if it's a timepiece or an observatory, the wheel of the year has three divisions, like a threefold year. And that's something that I've been playing with for a little while now, a couple of years. And I had this diagram originally, and it was based on 4th century star lore from Hadrian's Wall, a Mithraic monument. But I was interested in the main god for the Celts, according to Julius Caesar, 50 BC, was Mercury. Of course, the Celts didn't call him Mercury. So historians and archaeologists just refer to him as the Celtic Mercury. And he's often equated with the Gallic god Lugus, who has three faces. Now, Mercury relates to the number 3 because it has a retrograde motion 3 times every year. So that's its numerical code, if you like. So I was thinking about that, and Mercury retrograde doesn't always happen exactly at the same time every year. It's much more fiddly than that. So I was thinking, how would you correspond the year to Mercury retrograde? And the idea I came up with was this, that you divide the year into 3 equal sections. And the division I've used is this star lore thing from Hadrian's Wall. But in the first area, I put Lu. Second area at the top, I put Ogma. And in the third area, I put Dagda. I'm kind of seeing Lu, Ogma, Dagda as 3 faces combined of a Celtic Mercury. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It was just a way of kind of creating 3 areas where Mercury retrograde could happen. Like that's the tennis court. It's going to have its retrograde motions in. There's 3 fields, if you like. So that's what seemed to be played out at Stonehenge. It's the same. That if the circumference represents the passage of time in a year, it's been divided into 3 areas. So back to thinking of Brigid as a blacksmith, and could she possibly correspond with the days of pine and the forge and the blacksmithery and stuff? And I realized that actually, yes, she's a triple goddess, and she has 3 qualities or 3 special skills, and you can correspond them to this pattern of the threefold year. That right now in the days of pine would be the forge, the making of things in the forge. And after the winter solstice at the bottom, the first Akma is the rising, and all of that lore in the first Akma is to do with poetry and the inspiration of poetry. That which leaves the upper area for healing. And of course, that's the realm of apples. The realm of apples is Avalon. It's a place to be healed, where Arthur's healed and all the rest of it. So, you know, it's nothing, it's only patterns. I'm not saying this is a dogma or anything, but it is curious that if you saw Brigid as the goddess all year round, and she's threefold because there were 3 goddesses called Brigid, daughters of Dagda, and the 3 skills of Brigid are blacksmith, poetry, and healing. That's quite interesting. It's just a way of making sense of pine and the days of Libra being the blacksmith time of year. Now, I'll make more sense of that in a minute as well. So I'd already come to thinking that the days of pine, because it's the first tree in the final ACMA, and the final ACMA is all about the wild hunt. I came to see pine as the preparations for the hunt. So I did this illustration some years ago, and I called it "Waiting for the Hunt." And the dogs are there; they're not hunting; they're just sitting patiently. But above the dog's head, at the 9 o'clock position, is Libra, because for the next 6 months we're in the dark half of the year, if you like. So we're going to go from Libra to Scorpio and Samhain to Sagittarius, then the winter solstice, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So the dogs are there waiting patiently for the preparations for the wild hunt. So we'd already observed last year, I think it was, the nature of the pine tree. It was hard to find any authentic Celtic mythology about the pine tree, but there were some references to a culture hero in Ireland called Finn McCool. And Finn McCool's kind of like an Iron Age, Dark Age King Arthur figure, in the sense that he has a band of warriors, and the warriors are called the Fianna. So it's a bit like King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. In Ireland, you've got Finn and the Fianna. But the lore of them, they are young warriors, super gymnastic athletes, and they protect the settlements of Ireland. And then the geography of that begins to make sense, because in the stories, Finn McCool and the Fianna, they camp on the hilltops in the pine woods. So pine is where they have their camps and where they practice their martial skills and do their protection of the landscape. But this is how it works with geography, and this is going to be quite important. Going to go into it more next year probably. But simplistically, any Celtic tribe is going to create a settlement where there is drinking water. So the settlements are always in the watersheds where the springs become a river. And then you can have a domestic lifestyle in the valley where the river is, that you can, you cook your food, do your washing and all the rest of it. So that water is really, really important. But what it means that the Celtic families and clans and tribes, they're living domestically in the valley areas. The middle ground between the valley and the hilltops, the middle ground is farming and fruit tree growing. That's where you're grazing sheep and cattle and so on. But the very, very top, the ridges, the hilltops, the high places in between the valleys are where the young warriors would protect the valley. They're on the hilltops amongst the pine trees, living there, kind of roughing it throughout the summertime, just being self-sufficient and making sure there's no predators going to attack the village. So that's there in that kind of society lifestyle. But what would happen is that these days, when you're going from the summertime into the cold months, the warriors on the hilltops would come down to the village encampments and they would winter indoors by the rivers, with the families and stuff. So it's this time now, going into autumn and winter, that the warriors would be coming down to settle for the winter. But before they did that, the final part of gathering in food to get you through the harsh winter is the hunting time. So there is some evidence of Finn McCool and the Fianna living in the hilltops in the pine trees. The pine trees are of the high ground, and they're also where they're preparing to hunt. So it's perfect as the first tree preparation before the wild hunt. And I'll go back to the blacksmith and the forge at this time of year, because the agricultural year has concluded with the harvest time. There's no more farming to do. So the blacksmith is repairing and making new tools for the farming next year and making weapons for the protection of the land, and also making things like horseshoes, so the very act of the forge work, the metal work, is in preparation for future events, whether you're putting horseshoes together or making farming equipment or making weapons and shields and helmets. The blacksmith is planning ahead for what's to come, whether it's immediate or in the following year for the agriculture. So there are already 2 videos on the YouTube channel. One of them is called Stag Lords, Antlered Consorts of the Deer Goddess. And I recommend watching that. It helped make sense of Gwyneth Neath and Finn McCool. And we'll delve into that in more detail with Samhain, with Gorse and Heather. And then more specifically to what I've just been talking about, there's also a video of Finn McCool and the Wild Hunt. And that goes into some detail of the Fianna getting preparing themselves for the Wild Hunt to come. So I'll stop there. I know I advertise this as being Finn McCool and Gwyneth Neath, and we can talk about that. But really, we'll really go into that with Gorse and Heather. But just looking at pine and its relationship to the blacksmith, and maybe even Brigid, the goddess, as the blacksmith. Those fires, 3 fires, if you like, fires of poetry as spring rises, fires of healing in the summertime, and then the fires of the forge. And the forge is preparation for the future, making tools that will be needed to help people in the future to come. So I'll stop the presentation. I'll keep recording and we can talk about some of those ideas. You can put your microphones back on. Everybody there okay?
Yeah, I have a question on that. All the pentagrams diagram. There's the 3 gateways, right, at Stonehenge, and the one that at 6 o'clock is got quite a few points on it, and it's actually in line with the opening.
Yeah,
I found that very interesting because the other 2 don't line up.
I haven't
exactly.
Yeah, I haven't studied it thoroughly, but if that corresponds with winter solstice, that's really interesting because of sites like Newgrange in Ireland, which are aligned with the winter solstice.
Right.
I don't know if that gateway at Stonehenge does or not, or whether it's just a diagram
That'd be
coincidence.
interesting to niggle out.
Yeah. I don't have the brain for it. I'm still learning as well, but obviously
We all are.
the Ogham year wheel is the sun going around the ecliptic each year. And then dancing with the sun is the moon going new moon, full moon, new moon, full moon. That's happening. So the sun and the moon are there, ever present. But the pentagrams suggest Venus and threefold is Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I don't have the brain for. That somehow I'm thinking that there's other planetary observations going on, not just the sun and the moon. But
that we're not aware of.
Could I just say,
I
found that pentagram towards 6 o'clock very interesting, because I think line up with Jupiter, at the bottom. The first stone you go to when you go up to Stonehenge.
Ah,
It was kind of like the beginning. And I thought that was fascinating that all that time ago, that other guy had come up with the same things. So, but I've kind of worked out that one. The other two, I've always been into the tumuli around. And I think probably, well, we do know, don't we? There's a lot more there than there's ever been uncovered.
Right.
But the fact that do you think that might go to Jupiter, the henge stone?
well, Jupiter moves around. It's that
Right.
what we now
Don't you
know
call
of.
that? Don't the first stone you go to? Don't they call that Jupiter, or do they
I don't
call
know.
that the heel stone?
The
I don't know.
heel stone, I think.
Yeah, it's called the heel stone, but I've always thought, I don't know, I said to Chris Street about it, I thought that it was, I don't know why, I wanted to think that it was called Jupiter. It's like the grandfather. And then when you walk up the slope to go to the stones, there's one that lays in the ground. And I always think of that as being the mother. The mother, and I always feel really strong energy from that. But I do think that your pentagrams, Yuri, of the roses and the evergreens, I think they are really truly beautiful.
They fit. They
just
fit,
so blow me
absolutely.
away. Pardon?
They
What
fit.
Yeah, they're just so beautiful.
Well,
You don't always have to have, typecast of why everything is. It's just a feeling that you get when you see it, and it resonates with you.
So
that's what I feel.
The way those pentagrams work is like if you have a big circle, it doesn't matter how big it is, but the pentagrams from that circumference going inwards create a smaller circle in the middle. And that's the relationship at Stonehenge, that the stone circle of Stonehenge in relationship to the outer boundary is defined by pentagrams. The sacred geometry there. So it's not just a random sized circle inside a bigger circle. It's been measured out and defined by 5-pointed stars. 6-pointed stars would give you a different
Celtic
circle.
era.
Say that
If you're
again.
looking at the Celtic era, the Druids, they worked with 3 planets.
Yeah.
There was 3 planets on display all of the time. And I'm on sketchy ground, but there's 2 planets that appear in the morning. Is that Venus, the one closest to the sun?
Jupiter.
That appears in the morning and appears in the evening. And it was only the 13th century or 8th century, 13th century that they realised that it's actually one planet. It's the same planet that appears in the morning as it does in the evening.
Oh, what, you mean Venus?
Is it Venus? Yeah.
Yeah, because they call it the morning and the evening star.
Well, that's right. So with the
And it's
3
the
planets,
first one you see in the morning. It's the last one. It's the first one you see in the evening as well.
yeah. But with the 3 planets on display, with the sun and the moon, is that not the 3 entrances? Is that the 3 planets that they play with all the time? The one that they bring in? Is that the 3
they'd
entrances?
be that precisely dispersed in the sky? I don't know.
Don't know.
Venus and Mercury were known as paradromoi. It's a Greek word, and it means runs with the sun. And because they're closer to the sun than Earth is, and usually the morning star and evening star is Venus, but sometimes it can be Mercury. It depends where they are in their orbits, and
And the number 3 is very significant there.
So Mercury goes retrograde.
That's the lines I was thinking, Rosemary. Yeah.
Mercury goes retro. Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year, so its number is 3. And Venus does a 5-petaled orbit around the sun every 8 years. So the number of Venus is 5, and it corresponds with all the flowers that are 5-petaled, all the rose family flowers and stuff. So
Can
there's,
I ask you, Yuri, is Sirius connected with Stonehenge at all?
I don't know.
It's the only one that I've made at Stonehenge that is one of the stars. Is Sirius connected?
It would depend on the time of year. So here's another thing just to get your head around for looking at old stuff, like from the medieval days and stuff. They didn't understand Venus, Mercury, and Saturn, etc., as being planets. They saw them as stars. So then you've got Venus, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, and they were called the wandering stars because they look like stars, but they move around. They're on their own orbits. In contrast to all of the other stars, which are distant suns, as we know, but they're fixed. They don't go roaming around. Sirius is always there by Orion's belt. It never deviates. The Orion's belt points to Sirius, and that will always be the way. But Venus and Mercury and Jupiter, they're stars that come and go and do whatever they want. To medieval minds, they were wandering stars rather than fixed stars. But places like Avebury and Callanish on the Isle of Lewis are aligned with fixed stars, like the stars of Cygnus the Swan and stuff like that. So they were aiming at fixed constellations, but Venus and Mercury and Jupiter, they whiz around. They dance wherever they want, seemingly. They have patterns.
Yeah.
So you've got fixed.
Yeah, I think that when I said about the heel stone being called Jupiter, I didn't mean it as being the actual star.
No, the
planet.
It
was just something to do with its energy. It was like a grandfather standing, not standing guard, but overseeing the whole procession. That's how I always saw it. So yes. Not really as a, as an actual star.
In classical mythology, Jupiter is Zeus, the king of the gods. So it's like the king stone, if you like, the great father figure.
That's how I felt it was.
Yeah.
Rather than the actual planet. So I'm not an astrologer, as you know. So
the Celtic or Irish equivalent of Jupiter and Zeus is Dagda. He's the old father figure god, and his part of the year would go down to the zodiac signs that correspond with Jupiter and Saturn. So it's like old father time, Sagittarius and Capricorn stuff. So it's like the year begins as a young boy, and then he gets older and older and older, and he's old father time as we get closer to the winter solstice.
Oh, Methuselah appeared to me today, so you don't get any older than that. And that's an interesting story in itself. Pine trees. I love pine trees.
Yeah, I've got something going on with Phagos Beach and Saturn. That comes across to one of your favourites, it called Corcoran. What's the one you use?
Or what?
Oh, it's one of the gods that you mentioned. I think it's called Cannon. And that goes to the hounds, the 3 hounds you showed.
Yes. You got Finn McCool and Gwyneth Neath are kind of the same figure. They're the winter hunter. Finn and Gwyn are the same name. One's Gaelic, one's Brythonic. But they're the winter hunter of the wild hunt, if you like. Yeah.
Those three
I was-
hounds also brought to mind Hecate. Hecate's three dogs.
I
There's
was
a
thinking of
there's a Welsh
Brigid
deity with a
the-
hound.
and the forge. And I wondered, because obviously they would have used wood. And I wondered what pine was used for, Yuri. What did you see? Like oak was used for the ships, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And pine in more modern times was used a lot in housing. But I mean, I wonder what she uses in the forge, whether
Yeah,
it is pine wood.
I was thinking along those terms as well. And the pine tree is protected as a chieftain tree in the Brehon
tree.
laws of Ireland. But it's not the best wood for burning in a blacksmith forge. What it is really good for, because it's a soft wood, you can break it into chips and splice it, and it's great kindling. But more important is the pine cones themselves are perfect kindling. So for starting a fire and keeping a fire going, pine serves its purpose in that way. But to generate really powerful heat, you need a hardwood like oak to generate more heat, if you like. Pine burns very quickly, burns out and creates a lot of ash, whereas you want lots of hot embers. So that's your dense woods like oak. Yeah. Apparently the best charcoal comes from holly tree.
Isn't
No. So a blacksmith would understand all the different woods and charcoal making and which way to get the heat you needed to melt the metals out of the ore and stuff.
Oh.
Well, pine needles can be used as sage.
Yeah, they're very good for you as well.
If you get pine needles,
Yeah, you can drink
if
pine
you
needles.
dry out the pine needles and layer them over a candle, it makes good sage. It gives out a beautiful blue scent.
And they are good for the immune system as well. Pine
Yes,
needles.
I recall you pointing out the teas a couple of years ago.
Pine
when we
needle
did the
tea
medicinals.
has much more vitamin C than
And
oranges.
it's called the pine cone.
Yeah, and pine cones is edible. This the
Pine cone. This is from California. It's from the sequoia. It's only half the size of the other one that I had. Dog ate it.
Did you take it home in your suitcase?
No, my daughter. My daughter brought it back from me from California.
Oh, wow.
And why that's green? That's green, is it, Yuri?
it's Cornish green.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
It's like a beautiful vein. If you put it on the window ledge, it'll open up for the sun and it'll shut down. It'll open up for the rain and it'll shut down for the sun.
Perfect weather vane.
Yeah, tell you the weather.
And Bacchus Dionysus has a magic wand called a thyrsus, and it has a pine cone
Got a
on
big one.
There's
a big one for you.
Yeah.
Everybody's getting their pine cones out now. And also
Absolutely.
the other thing is that they do refer to it as being like the pineal gland.
Yeah.
And that it's been
My
used
pine cone.
esoterically, sort of like spiritually, to symbolize the pineal gland.
In Mesopotamia, the temple guards had a bucket of sacred water and they had pine cones, and they would dip their pine cones in the sacred water and use the pine cone like a sprinkler for sprinkling sacred.
Asperger. Yes.
Yeah. So it's always had a place sacred to ceremony, hasn't it?
And they hold such dear secrets within before they open.
Some
They
things
are treasures.
treasures. Some things are pure childhood treasure, aren't they? You know, gathering conkers and gathering pine cones. It's irresistible, really.
It is.
And looking at the hats on the acorns, the fairy hats on the acorns.
I know that I'm new. This is my first time here, but I want to add about pines and pine cones, if I may.
Yes.
There are some pines where the cones only open in intense fire.
Mm-hmm.
And so those seeds are saved until a fire comes along. So when you're talking about the forge and blacksmithing, that just seemed to me that there was a tie-in with that. And that's when the seeds are released, and then a whole new forest is able to grow once the fire burns and the ash settles.
Yes. I can see the ancient warriors of Ireland on the hilltops in the pine trees using pine cones to light their fires in their camps, and also preparing for the wild hunt. The blacksmith is making horseshoes and sharpening spearheads and swords and stuff. So it's got all that preparatory feel to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
About
it's
those pine cones that don't open until the fire, that's the nature and the essence of renewal that she does. Thank the powers that be.
And it's an alchemy, isn't it? Metalwork.
Yes, yes, it is.
So looking at the wild hunt in the Ogham Grove as a kind of mystery school teaching, well, it's the first tree, and this is where the alchemical process begins of burning off base matter to find the gold inside, you know, that kind of thing. So that's quite nice.
Yes, it is.
I hadn't thought about Brigid, poetry, healing, and blacksmith being equally dispersed around the year. I thought that was a new idea to my mind, you know. But interesting that she wouldn't just be in bulk, but she's, you know, her three different qualities are all year round, possibly. You know, it's only a pattern. But if there was a time of year for the blacksmith aspect of Brigid, it's now, you know, because traditionally Libra is the blacksmith time of year.
And she is a triple goddess, so.
Yeah.
What you were saying earlier about the hunters coming down. Well, this is the time of the year that the shepherds would bring the flocks in.
That's right.
Now the harvest is done and the food is gathered, it's time for the shepherds to come down from the hills to bring their flocks in. This is where they assess the meat. They assess how much they're going to keep, how much food they've got against how much livestock they can keep with that food. So this is the time for sacrifice.
Yeah.
This is the time to honour. It's a time to honour all of the food and to decide what food has to be given, what food has to be kept. So it's an important part of the year in that when you say the hunter and going out on the hunt, yes, but also domestic livestock.
Yes, so much. I was also thinking that the 6 months of summertime are agricultural farming time, and that comes to a close with harvest time. So what do you do next? Unless you're a shepherd bringing sheep in, you know, they're repairing their tools and making new tools for the next farming period and stuff. So the blacksmith's very busy. You know, there's no farming to do. What do we do? Okay, get the forge burning. You know, it's like, again, it's looking ahead and creating metalwork for the future that's going to benefit the whole tribe.
For the winters, yes.
So they're like
seasonal,
seasonal activities, aren't they? You know, like you don't need to defend the hilltops in the wintertime because no one attacks in the winter. It's just too crazy. Battles used to happen in the spring and summer. You can't really fight wading through snow and cold and everything. Or everyone comes into the village and you make a palisade around the village or whatever, you know. So there's kind of like
Well, this is-
outward stuff in the summertime and then withdrawing in the wintertime.
Well, this is what Caesar got wrong. He planned to invade in the spring, and what he didn't allow for was a British summer. It didn't happen. So Caesar invaded in the spring, and it was still winter. And they couldn't march, and they were restricted by marching. They were restricted by they couldn't get their chariots out. They couldn't get these ships ashore. They were just restricted by British summer. They just couldn't hack it.
Another fanciful idea, if you like, is just a poetry really, but if you're down in the valley and you're looking at the surrounding hills, then you know that in the hilltops there's the warriors protecting the settlement, but also the druids lived separately from the tribal areas. So the druids would be up on high as well with hill forts or nematons, but from the valley looking up to the hilltops and the pine trees, the next thing above that is just the stars. So the pine tree has a direct relationship to the stars and the stories of the stars, because there they are on the highest ground, if you like.
They're the penultimate, yeah.
Yeah, with
The very highest.
protective warriors and astrologer druids all on the hilltops.
But the pine tree is like the eagle. The pine tree, the tallest tree in the forest.
That's right.
But it's got the psychic abilities. It's got the foresight. It can see a long way. So you've got that goes with a pine tree. You've also got the divining rod. If you make a divining rod from a pine tree, it takes you to spirit. It'll point you towards spirit. So if you want to communicate with spirit, use a divining rod from a pine tree, and that'll take you that way.
That's interesting.
So there's all alternatives.
The ultimate goal, I think, with the fourth Acma and its wild hunt is to get to the spirit realm. And that's what happens in the days of Aspen. So that's quite interesting that the pine is going to direct you to the spirit realm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're looking at Samhain, the time of the thinnest vowel is when the vowel is at its thinnest, and you can cross from one to the other. If you're looking at that.
I resonate with the pine very, very deeply. Yeah. I grew up on an island where all we had was pine, mostly, not all, but on the beaches, and there's a lot of scrub and a lot of pine.
Yeah, I grew up in a pine forest. I had a pine forest right next to me.
Oh,
Every day, you wake up and you can smell the pine.
isn't that lovely?
Right. We're getting close to time, so we'll do the meditation. I'll stop recording, and if you put your microphones off, we'll meditate to the pine tree.